I'm going to go through all of the Streamlit widgets for you in this one video. Now that we've taken care of the viewing part and the interactive parts, maybe you're left wondering, how do I tell Streamlit which part of the application should react to any inputs? Well, you don't. You don't define which methods should run if there's a user interaction. You don't get to decide which part of the app to rerun. Your script is going to rerun from top to bottom every time there's a user interaction. So you don't have to wrap your mind around which part of the app was updated. It makes it easier to think about, but if I rerun the app every time, am I going to reprocess my 200 megabytes uploaded file every time? If I did not interact with this button, it's going to go back to false. How do I preserve the fact that I have clicked on it already? Session states. We keep our widget states inside Python variables, but sometimes you will struggle with control flow, like how do we do nested buttons? Because when we click on another button, the previous button goes back to false. We forget the fact that we have clicked or interacted with other widgets. We solve this using the session state object. You initialize session state at the beginning of the app, and then you store things inside it like a global dictionary. It's going to be preserved between reruns. You clicked on a button and you want to keep this information. Session state, you just authenticated. Session state, your best machine learning model.
Session state.
Remember the key argument inside the input widgets? The key argument was a unique identifier of your widget, and you can access the value of any widget from session state. All of the input elements we saw beforehand have an onClick or onChange parameter, which you can use to call back a method every time you interact with them. This is the perfect place to edit the session state. So if you want a typical Streamlit counter, you can initialize your session state counter to 0, and then every time you click on a button, you increment this information by 1. Caching. So I've got this function that takes as input a pandas data frame from an uploaded Excel file and runs lots of operations on it. And I don't want to rerun those operations if my input file does not change. So add the stcache decorator to any method that you don't want to see rerunning if the input did not change. You may have a lot of problems with stcache if you are using complex objects. Streamlit needs to be able to hash the object and see if it has mutated or not. So in 2022, Streamlit has released 2 new caching systems that I'm going to recommend you use instead because they are the main way of caching your methods. Experimental memo. Same as before, if you've got a method you don't want to see rerunning if the input argument did not change, you decorate it with the experimental memo decorator. If the script reruns, Streamlit will reuse the previous result linked to your input file. This preserves all previous results in memory. So if you don't want your app to explode in terms of memory requirements, you can use the TTL and max entries arguments to limit the number of results to store in memory. This is a good thing to use if your app in Streamlit Cloud regularly goes out of memory. Experimental singleton. Add this decorator to a method that is returning a heavy object like a database connection or a TensorFlow and PyTorch session. Those objects are shared across all users of your app. Both memo and singleton can be cleared by the clear method. So there you go. Memory, bam. With session state and caching, you can control the information that you want to recompute between reruns. This is Streamlit boiled to its very fundamentals. You're a Streamlit expert. Congratulations! Here's a badge. Let me have a drink. We know how to stack our widgets vertically, which is nice, but can we do better? Layout. You know what a context manager is? Because we are going to see a lot of them. Sidebar. I store all of my apps info, configuration, and settings inside the sidebar. So it's easily accessible for anyone to reconfigure their app very quickly. How to use this? 2 methods. st.sidebar.anything will add the element to the sidebar. Or you can use the with st sidebar context manager to bulk call multiple Streamlit widgets to add to your sidebar. Expander. How does BERT work? Your colleagues would love to see, but your managers really Not really. You can use an expander to hide this information. The preferred way of building one is through the context manager method, and you put all of your Streamlit widgets inside. You can also store a new expander in a variable and call any Streamlit method on it to fill it. Container. If you call multiple widgets in your script, they're going to appear in the order that you called them. Sometimes you want to predefine containers and then fill them later. You can create a container with a context manager to bulk fill it, or you can create a container at the top of your app, store it in a variable, and then fill it later in your script by calling Streamlit methods on the container variable. Empty. It's like containers that you're able to clear whenever needed. Create a placeholder object, put a Streamlit widget inside, and when you don't need it anymore, you can clear it with the empty method. Or use it as a context manager, and every Streamlit call inside is going to overwrite the previous Streamlit call. So you can build a kind of a timer like this. Columns. Build a list of columns by specifying a number or a list of relative widths. Then add the widgets to the columns through the width notation or by calling them on the variable. You cannot nest columns, but you can create empty ones. Using the width notation is the only way to add external components to columns. Forms. When you put a Streamlit form using the Python variable method or the context manager method, any user interaction with a widget inside a form is not going to trigger a rerun. And then you've got the submit button, which is going to trigger the rerun with the updated values in the variables. Woo la la. We've still got a few features to see. Care to stay with me until the end? Other stuff. This is the cherry on the cake. This is what will make your app stand out from the others. Almost there. Let's go. Set page config. This is where you can change your app's title and the icon that is displayed in the tab of your browser. You can also define if you want your app in wide mode or constrained mode, and if at the beginning of the app the sidebar should be open or closed. This is also where you can configure the get help or report an issue links of your apps. This needs to be the very first Streamlit method that is called, so I usually put it at the start of my main method. Error, warning, info, success. This is for colored messages without CSS hack. Exception. If you're coding and expecting an error, you can catch it and display it in your app and then continue running the rest of scripts. Spinner. Woo! You use it as a context manager. Any code inside this context manager is going to show the spinner while it's running. This is a good way of showing a user that your app is running, no problem, no worries. Progress. Show a progress bar that you can edit at any point of your app. Stop. It literally stops the app. I use this to pause the app while the user did not complete all of the information in the sidebar. Rerun. This is for more advanced situations, like you want to rerun Streamlit periodically to collect data and then display the new values in kind of a real-time system. Echo. I use this for lectures sometimes. I type some code in the Echo context manager and the code and result are going to be displayed all together in the app. Help. To show the help of a method that we don't know. Experimental show. It's like STWrite, but it will print the name of the variable and then the variable. Experimental set and get query parameters. Sometimes you want to preserve your app information inside the URL so you can send it to your colleagues, and when they type this URL in their browser, they're going to find the app with the preserved state. Well, there is a specific Streamlit method that parses the query parameters for you. So you can use those to initialize some session states and input elements values, and there's another method to set back the query parameters in the URL so you can then copy it and send it to your colleagues. Balloons! Use it at the end of any long computation to celebrate it all worked. You at the end of the very long ride. You made it! Woo! You saw all of the Streamlit widgets. Now we can build almost all kind of apps. You'll find many examples of apps inside the forum, in the weekly roundups. There's so many of them. Have a look at them. Hope you enjoyed the ride. Don't forget to like and subscribe. It helps a ton and means a lot. And then I'll see you next time. Happy streamliting! Money, money. Anyway, with the input elements down, your manager is going to happily play with the app, or even the marketing team, or your colleagues, or your kids and partner. Dear partner, do you want to play with my Python code? Yes! Oh, yes, darling, why not? I'm gonna take a nap. I'm not doing this every week.